All right. So, lesson 5, chapter 21 and 22 of 1 Samuel. David flees and Nob is destroyed. So we left off last time. Jonathan and David, their hearts being knit together as good, godly friends, cared for one another, and Jonathan delivered the news. Jonathan finally came to the realization his father wanted to kill David. David had to flee, and they made that promise, a covenant between each other to care for each other's families, whatever happened. And so now we see how that works here. So, let's begin the reading at 1 Samuel chapter 21, starting at verse 1. Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee. And what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, and what there is present. And the priest answered David, and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest, and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him the hallowed bread, for there was no bread there, but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So David has fled here to Nob, a city of priests, and he goes to Ahimelech, the high priest, there in that city. Okay? Remember, Ahimelech is the, I believe, grandson or great-grandson of Eli, the old priest in the days of when Samuel was just young, had his 2 sons who had died out in the battlefield after taking the ark out there. Eli died in that same thing too. But anyways, David goes to this priest, to Ahimelech, and the priest knows who David is. He is an important man, a leader in battle, but he's also a relative of the king. He's the king's son-in-law. And for him to show up suddenly here, all alone, makes Ahimelech a bit suspicious, because he probably also knows about Saul's hatred for David. Are they not getting along? What is David doing here? Is he fleeing from the king? If I do something for David, will it anger the king? David lies. Again, he fails to trust in the Lord. Rather, he decides to create his own type of plan. And he tells him that, well, I'm on a secret mission from the king. That's why you don't see very many people with me. We're here because we're on a secret mission for the king. And oh, by the way, we're hungry. We've been journeying 3 days. Now, the problem for Ahimelech is that he has no bread here in the tabernacle, or in the temple, sorry. At least no common bread, a loaf of bread that he and the others may eat. No, what he had was the bread on the table of showbread. The holy bread that's consecrated to the Lord, that's baked and made there. Just like you have the candlesticks, and you have the altar of incense, and you have the table of showbread there in the holy place. Those are things consecrated to the Lord. They are not to be, the candles are not to be used to be taken and just placed in your own house, but they're there for a special reason, consecrated to the Lord, and the same for this bread. Okay? So right away, that's what Ahimelech points out to David. Okay? So only the priests could eat it. But God did have a higher law. Ask that question there. What higher law comes into play here? It's the law of love. God has a law that says Man may not eat this showbread. But at the same time, God also commands me to have love for my neighbor. And here I have a neighbor who is an-hungering. He needs food. And so, the law of love says that I may use that. I can use that bread and give it to David and his men because they need it for their lives. They need it for their strength. Okay? So Ahimelech allows the men to eat the bread as long as they are ceremonial clean. Okay? As long as they're ceremonially clean, they haven't desecrated any of the laws or committed any offenses or even done any activities that might be permitted, but that are not permitted to be eaten right before one eats holy food. And David gave an affirmation. Yes, the men are consecrated holy. They may eat it. Okay? Now, meanwhile, we have a little side story, and he's kind of important because he'll come into play later. There's another man there, a man who's a friend of Saul. His name is Doeg, the Edomite. And he's standing back in the shadows, listening and watching and seeing what's going on. He has a mind that we might say maybe is, at least for this type of thing, like a steel trap. He is going to observe, he is recording, and he will be able to eventually give a report. Now look at the next set of verses. Verse 8, And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business, a lie there again, required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elath, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save here. And David said, There is none like that, give it me. And David rose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the door of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, you see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of a madman, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So we have two things going on in this next section here. First of all, we have David requesting of Ahimelech, by the way, in addition to the bread, I need a weapon. You see, King Saul sent me on a task that needed such expediency, I didn't even have time to return back to my home and arm myself. Here I am without any weapons, more my men. Can you please bear a sword or spear or knife or something? Well, Ahimelech tells him, I have no weapons here other than the sword of Goliath, that sword that you used to cut off his head. It is wrapped up and it's hidden over there behind the ephod. And David says, well, I guess I shall take that because I have nothing else and you have nothing else and I need a weapon. I had to leave so quickly. So he lies once again there. Okay? So he gets that sword and he leaves. But where does he go? He goes to the king of Achish. Okay? Now Achish would have been an Edomite. He would have been an enemy of David. So, being an enemy of David, here David is fleeing right into his enemy's presence. Well, he's probably hoping that he can get the enemy to accept him or be on his side because he desires to flee from Saul. Well, he's recognized. They know who he is. Isn't this the one who they sang about? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s? Wow. The men of Achish bring David. Okay? And they bring him before the king. And when he comes before the king, David realized he is not in a good position. He may be trapped or captured, and so he realizes he needs to create some type of diversion or story or way to get out of it. And he begins to act as though a madman. He begins to speak in probably nothing but gibberish, and as he's speaking, he allows the saliva to drool down his face and spittle to come out. So there's water and moisture spreading everywhere in the air. No one will want to get near for those germs that are coming off him. And he begins to claw with his hands on the wooden door as though he's a madman, and he acts as though he is mad. And the king now says to his men, I don't care who this man is. Why have you brought this madman before me? Get him out of here. Probably fearing that the madness of David could leap to him. Remember the evil spirits that we read about in Jesus' time. Those devils could leave a body and go into something else. Well, they probably feared the same thing here. And this devil will leave this man's body and jump to me. Or maybe this man is diseased and I will catch the disease. Get him out of here. He's a madman anyways. He can't do us any harm in this state. Get rid of him. Send him away. And so his men then take David out of the palace and release him. But where does David go after that? Let's see what happens there. Chapter 22, starting at verse 1. David therefore departed thence. So he leaves Achish and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said to David, Abide not in the hold, depart and get thee into the land of Judah. Then David departed and came into the forest of Hereth. So David, while he's fleeing, they leave King Achish in the land of the Philistines, and they go to another place. This is a land of caves, and they found a cave that was suitable for them, and they began to live there. Word then was spread to David's family where he was, because this place is not far from Bethlehem. Remember, David didn't have to go that far to the battlefield of Goliath before, and that's where nearby this is. Okay? And why would David's family feel threatened? Well, Saul might come and maybe capture his mother and father. And Saul then could use them as a ransom, say to David, David, now come back here to the kingdom, or I'm going to kill your mother and father. And David, loving and caring for his mother and father, would be tempted to come back so that the lives of his father and mother were spared, and he falls into the hands of Saul that way. So his parents also are afraid for their lives, and they too want some protection. And so David goes and he speaks to the king of Moab and sets something up there so that the king of Moab will protect his family. Because if you remember, David is a descendant of the tribe of Moab. If you remember, Obed, we go back in the lines of families. Who was Obed the son of? Logan. And who was she married to? Kenton. Boaz. Ruth was a Moabitess. She was from the land of Moab. So you have Ruth, Obed, and you have Jesse, and then you have David. So just 4 generations there. So he has descendants, you could say, or relatives in Moab. He leaves his family there in Moab. Okay? And then David is called by Gad the prophet to leave. David, your family is going to stay here, but you cannot. You must leave this wicked land, this land here of the Moabites, and you must return back to the land that God has given you, the land of Judah. Verse 6 here. And when Saul heard that David was discovered and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said unto his servants that stood unto him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirreth up a servant against me to lie in wait at this day. So he asks them, is any of you on my side? Don't any of you want some spoils? And here we get verse 9. Then answered Doeg, the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent to Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came all of them to the king. So not just Ahimelech, but all the priests come. And Saul said, excuse me, hear now, thou son of Ahitub. And he answered, here am I, my lord. And Saul said unto him, why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him, bread and a sword, and hast inquired of the Lord for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as at this day? Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, and who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thy house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor all the house of my father. For thy servant knew nothing of all of this, less or more. And the king said, thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn, and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. And the king said unto Doeg, turn thou, and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me. Fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life. But with me thou shalt be in safeguard. So Saul, having his ear tuned to the ground in his kingdom, hears. We see that David collected about 400 men on his side. David gets wind of that. He hears there's a large collection of men gathering over there in those caves by Adullam. Well, Saul puts 1 and 1 together, or 2 and 2 together, and very quickly he knows, I know what's going on there. David must be there. He's trying to build up an army to fight against me. So Saul then heads over in that direction, and he goes to the Benjamites. Okay? And he asks them, why have you helped my son Jonathan and David conspire against me? Do you expect David to give you a better life than the one I've already given you? I'm the king. I can give you what you want. Is no one sorry for me? He's trying to appeal to them. And the only one that gives an answer that we read here is Doeg, the Edomite. He says, not everyone is against you, Saul. You see, Saul, it's the priests that are against you. You see, I saw with mine own eyes David came into this land. He went to the temple, and there the priest Ahimelech, he gave to him, well, first of all, he inquired to God for him, prayed for him. Then he gave him some victuals, some bread to eat, and then he gave him the sword of Goliath, so that he has all these things. You see, Saul, it's not just the people of the land, but mainly the priests who are against you. It's the priest who did this, and I saw it with mine own eyes. Doeg is only thinking about himself. His heart is in the wrong place. His heart is focused on himself and not others. Okay? So, he tells that lie, that part, that Ahimelech had inquired of the Lord. That was wrong. He was correct in saying, yes, the priest gave him bread and sword. Saul turns to Ahimelech and asks him, what about all this? Ahimelech tries to defend himself, and he says, I did not inquire of the Lord for him. However, I did these two other things. But you must understand, Saul, who am I to question the king's son-in-law? If the king's son-in-law comes to me and says he needs this, I am going to give it to him. He's your son-in-law. He's a prince. I would not dare disobey that or not give him what he asked for, because I would expect that he was on exactly what David had said. I would expect that he is here doing some of your bidding, some of your work, and that's what I was told, and so I did it. You see, David's lie has now gotten Ahimelech in trouble. And in the end, what does Saul want? He orders his men to kill the priests, the men, knowing that the Lord would not be pleased with that. Refuse. They wisely refuse because they know that there would be murder. So who instead does the killing? Well, the man whose heart is only focused on himself. Doeg the Edomite. He kills these many priests, destroys the whole city of Nob. Women, children, animals, everything. Only one person escapes. Abiathar. He escapes and runs to David. Okay? And is able to give him the news. So, we can remember a few things here. David, he occasioned the death of the priest by putting Ahimelech in a position by lying to him. That's number one. Doeg told an additional lie that also put Ahimelech in a position to be killed. And finally, Saul ordered their killing. Now, all of these things were under the guidance of the Lord, because one must remember, one must say, well, why would the Lord want to kill Ahimelech? For that we have to go back to what we started out the lesson saying, that if we remember, Ahimelech is a a relative, a grandson or great-grandson of Eli. And if you remember, God had cursed the house of Eli because Eli refused to chastise and correct his children, his sons, when they were living in sin and wickedness. And so he said, the curse will be upon you and your generations. And so here is another generation of Eli who is being punished, as well as all of those other priests along with him. They are also still being punished for the sin of Eli. That's a good reminder for us. A parent who sins and sins gravely. Oh, it's with great sadness when we look at his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, because we see, look at them living in wickedness and sin. When one turns from the Lord, it only leads to the rest of the family often doing the same. We can only pray that God give grace. Okay? So that's one thing to make sure we point out. Satan is also obviously at work here too, because he wants to hopefully kill David and cut off the line of Christ. But that's not going to happen. So we see David is fleeing. God is in control of all things. We must learn, if there's one thing we can learn, trust in the Lord. David did not. He told lies. And it did not, in the end, help God's people. It hurt them because Abiathar was killed because of his lies. He was one of the people responsible in that way, in that sense. We must trust in the Lord. If it means that I need to take a punishment, then that's what it means. Okay? But I don't lie to try to get myself out of things. That only makes it worse in the long run. Alright, so I'll try to get